There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that will lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of the comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. I'm going to tell you that nothing, maybe nothing, gets more discussion with senior leaders and managers than when I mention something about younger generations and their expectations of their managers. I have to tell you, wow. It's almost like I lose control of the room for the next at least 15 minutes while I hear commentary after commentary after commentary, and it isn't always the best in the world. So to say the least, the expectations and experiences of the youngest generation in the workforce, Gen Z, and that early stages of millennials, by the way, is, shall we say, different. So regardless how you feel about the pros and cons of this generation, to have an effective, productive, engaged workforce, you got to learn how to lead this generation and lead them well. There's a lot of them out there, so it is us no choice as managers. Now, the question for the day is, so what does that mean you should do and not to do? And I am finding that some of the common public press popularizations of things to do and not do are not necessarily on target. So fortunately, we have some answers for you, and that's what we're going to talk about today. By the way, if you do what we're talking about today with the younger generations, I think you're going to find it works for everybody in the workforce anyway. So my guest today is Dr. Tim Elmore. He's the founder and CEO of Growing Leaders, and you can find them at growingleaders.com. It's an Atlanta-based nonprofit organization created to develop emerging leaders. Tim has spent more than 20 years serving alongside Dr. John Z. Maxwell. He's appeared in all the usual expectations you would have from a great business writer. So the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, USA Today, Psychology Today, and on TV and news media, and on we go, all over, for good reason. He's written over 35 books, including Habitudes, Images That Form Leadership Habits and Attitudes, The 8 Paradoxes of Leadership, A New Kind of Diversity, and what we're talking about today, The Glass is Still Half Full. So, Tim, welcome to the conversation.
Wanda, I can hardly wait. This is a topic we've got to wrestle with and master, so I'm glad you're hosting it.
I am glad you're giving us some advice. And first off, I love the first book, A New Kind of Diversity, and I've quoted it all over, but I'm particularly keen about the second one because it's got so much practical information. But let's back up a minute. What sparked your interest, your passion for writing and working with this younger generation?
Yeah. Well, I think what sparked it was pain points that I was experiencing. And that as I began to mix and mingle, I found out, oh my gosh, employers everywhere are struggling. It's not just my people, it's everywhere. So that was one. But secondly, I found out, as in the title of my last book, A New Kind of Diversity, it was an area of diversity that acted like an elephant in the room. We tend to know how to talk about ethnic diversity and gender diversity and income, but this is a diversity that we're not sure. So we gather at the water cooler and the 48-year-olds talk about the 22-year-olds, but we got to talk to them, not about them. So we've got to change some habits. And I'm just going to say from the very beginning, listeners, I am a fan of Gen Z. I am biased for them. And I have some data that will help you maybe change your mind. But if we approach them with suspicion, or I don't think you're going to make it, or I don't think you're good enough, or you're a slacker, no follower wants to follow a leader that thinks that way. So we're going to hopefully have a very redemptive and practical conversation on how to lead these young people.
For sure. I want to hear about the data, but I want to echo that comment. No one is going to give any leader their best if the leader thinks they're entitled, lazy, only wants a trophy, or any of the other phrases that I have said. And as I say to leaders often when I'm talking about this topic with them in general, I often say, look, you got to look in the mirror because these are your kids.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right.
So thinking about it that way, I think, can also help. All right, data. Tell me about the data. What do you have on this younger generation?
Yeah. So there, like in every new generation, there's positive and negative data. Sometimes, well, no, not sometimes, all the time, older generations dating way back to Socrates look at the younger and think, they're going to ruin the world. They're not ready. They're, late. Socrates even said, the kids in my day are disrespectful to their parents. And I'm going, you could have written that last week, that sort of thing. So just know we always tend to have a bias since the new generation looks different to think that they're worse. So that's number one. Secondly, though, they come in caring about different things than older generations do. So we think they don't care. So I'm meeting with focus groups all the time right now. I'm actually working on a new book called The Future Begins with Z. And it's about how do we lead these kids through the upsetting of the workforce that they're going to bring. So there are some, let me just give you one bit of data that might be helpful. So we often think these kids don't care because they don't seem to work hard and, blah, 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 blah. Here's what I'm finding in my focus groups. With these 22, 23-year-old young people coming into the workforce, they'll say, I feel like it doesn't make any difference. And then they start talking about former generations they're aware of. They could afford to buy a house at 27 years old. I got my first house at 25 years old. Now that was 40 plus years ago. The wage gap that exists between what a 20-something often makes and what could actually help them get ahead. So they feel like they're on this treadmill that won't get them where they want to go. Now, that's no excuse for a poor work ethic, but does at least explain, if not excuse, well, maybe we need to have a conversation and maybe we need to close that gap perhaps. So the data shows they do come in thinking differently, no doubt about it. We're not weird, but we do need to start a conversation and build that relationship that can bear the weight of honest disclosure. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say if you're running a business today, this younger generation is probably tending somewhere around 40%, maybe 50% of your workforce. You cannot afford to lose that much of your workforce. I don't care what's going on. So whether you like it or not, you got to dig in and figure out what's going to make this work. Absolutely, totally. All right. I am kind of just this innately curious person. So I'm always curious with how the next generation sees the world. And I feel like I've been through this generational thing about 5 times now, watching the next and their statements about them. So I'm with you on that one. But I have another piece of data that has really made me pause. And that is Josh Friedman's data. So Josh runs a global survey on EQ, and it is truly global, equally balanced around the world, one of the largest in the world, that says our emotional intelligence has declined since COVID-19, and it's not recovering. One. But more importantly, the hit to the youngest generation is pretty dramatic, and it's getting worse, not better. And if you take that and you say they are genuinely coming to the workplace with less sense of emotional well-being, good, bad, or indifferent reasons why not, they're having a harder time, then that should lead to a little bit of empathy here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, if you just stop and think about it, listeners, if they went through a period of quarantine, which we all did, and they were learning and growing, I mean, they were young people 4 or 5 years ago, they're naturally going to be on screens, and you just don't develop emotional intelligence on a screen. If you can, write me. I'd love to hear, but I've not seen anybody develop self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management well on a screen. So you're right. We need to lead with empathy. And I believe if we'll lead with that empathy, they're going to disclose some things that might explain behavior, not excuse it, but explain it. And now we can lead that can get us to a solution along the way. And that's what we need to get.
I totally 100% with you on that one. And by the way, it works for everybody. I mean, all of us would like that a little bit. And I realize it hasn't happened for past generations. And now you're not going to have a choice. All right. So we have talked about managers not loving this Generation Z, and I've given some hints about the kind of things that I have heard. Are there any comments to this you want to add that you think are kind of just to make sure everybody's on the same page here?
Well, I just read some data, and I'm going to verify it now, but 1 out of 5 Gen Zers, that would be maybe an early 20-something, has brought their parent with them to the job interview. Well, that is appalling for my generation. In fact, I would have been embarrassed. Mom, what are you doing? But we've parented in a very different way in our day. Not all, but many. And so that would lead them to think, well, let me be your agent here, sweetie, and sit next to you. Well, of course, many hiring managers are going, bye, we're not even going to start the interview. I'm not interviewing your mama or your daddy. I'm interviewing you. In fact, I even talk about one 22-year-old, 4.0 college GPA, that took a job offer, printed job offer, thanked the HR executive, and then said, but now my parents need to interview you to make sure you're a suitable boss for me. And of course, that ended the interview. So there is a parent at fault, oftentimes, not all the time, if we see something that seems less than ready for the work we're about to ask them to do. And we need to dig a little bit. Relationship is huge. And by the way, can I say one more thing? Trust must be earned, leaders. 25 years ago, when the millennials were the new kids on the block, they brought in a civic mindedness early on, and they just trusted leaders. Today, Gen Z is a little bit more like Gen X. They're a little skeptical. They look around and see corruption in corporate America, religious institutions. It's scary. It's sad, but they're not going to trust right away. We need to earn that trust through relationship. Yeah.
Well, we have assumed, I was just doing this with a group of leaders yesterday, we assume way too many times that trust is built because I know what I'm talking about. I'm credible. I'm reliable. I did what I said I was going to do. That's it. That's trust. And that is table stakes on trust. Because I can't actually tell as a young hire if you are credible or not, nor can I know if you're really going to be reliable when push comes to shove and I'm not in the room to represent myself. And so even the table stakes, I think, are up for grabs. And quite honestly, for not bad reasons. Tim, I'm reminded about your date about an interview, and I don't want to dig on this one, but I've heard that story before, only it was a different generation attached to it, that parents being involved. And if you think, I can give you some positives about that. I have a very super talented kid. My son would shoot me if I ever showed up with him, but that's a different story. But I can imagine I have a super talented child who has many different opportunities. I want to make sure that the first place he goes is a good place for him or her. And so therefore, I want to know a few things about how you're going to treat and what the experience is going to be and so on. And, while it may sound ridiculous, I could say that's not the end of the world.
Yeah. It's true.
It's just shocking is all. Okay.
I think parents have a different report card than when I was growing up and my parents. So we've overfunctioned oftentimes, and we've thought, I want to protect them, not prepare them. Well, we wouldn't say not prepare them, but we're focused so much on protecting that we've not given them some of the tasks that really get us ready for the workplace. And I don't fault the kid. I say, Mom and Dad, what were you doing or not doing that didn't get them ready?
It's also harder. It's not as easy. The laws have changed to get a basic job over the summer or whatever, to have some of that work experience. So they're not getting trained for that. The college application process makes it better that they have gone off and done some other fascinating summer experiences and also the job application process. So there's a bunch of, we're trying to add enrichments. And by the way, the things that can go wrong in the world are a lot bigger than I remember as I was growing up. And I don't want to go on a nostalgia tour, but there's reasons parents have been more protective, some legitimate ones. Okay. All right. So walk me through, what are the good things about this generation that we're missing?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned one of the myths that we often believe as older adults is they just don't care. They just don't care. They seem apathetic. In all of my focus groups, the Gen Zers would go, well, I guess I can see why you might think that, but we do care just about different things than you do. So that's where the employer may need to say, I would like you to care about this between 8 and 5, that sort of thing. Yeah. But when I have dug and found out, oh my gosh, they do care about the marginalized, for instance. Gen Z has a high passion for helping those who are outsiders. Now, I guess an employer might go, well, I don't care about that. We want to sell widgets here and, generate revenue. But I think that's a plus. There is a great predisposition in Gen Z to be an entrepreneur. So 72% of high school students in America want to be an entrepreneur. 7 out of 10. Now,
Wow.
are they all going to succeed? Probably not. But just the fact that they're predisposed to think that way, I need to capitalize on that in my office. What if we could set up a gig economy within the office? And we put some Gen Zers on it and they could use their creativity and energy. And we set aside budget for the untold fruits of their labor. Oh my gosh. In fact, I think we'll keep them if we'll do that, because otherwise they're going to leave. In droves right now, Gen Zers are leaving the workplace after sometimes months, maybe 2 years, because they found this antiquated system that, in their opinion, that didn't fit who they were, and they decided to start something
Yeah.
themselves.
And, you said earlier there were generations where at 25, 27, you had a house. So that meant you had a mortgage. You might have had children, maybe, maybe not, but you were thinking in that direction. Typically, not everybody, and sort of moving that direction. And that meant taking a risk on running an entrepreneurial business or being an entrepreneur were higher. Today, it's not that. I mean, they're delaying buying houses largely because they have to. There's not a choice. The expenses are too high. They're later in starting a family. So if you're going to try an entrepreneurial gig, now's the time to do it. Why not give it a go and see what you like about it?
Absolutely. I love that. Love that one.
So, okay. So you said they care about different things. I've seen this in other surveys as well, that they really, really care about the marginalized and they care about the transparency. This is the thing that has been stood out for me is you said you're doing, but show me you're doing. I want to see the data to say that you really do mean diversity, for example, or whatever.
No doubt about it. I would say, I can't speak for all 59 million Gen Zers, but I would say many of them in the focus groups, the qualitative and quantitative data I have gathered tells me they look at older generations and say, your speeches are great. You say all the right things. I don't see you doing them. I just talked to a young Gen Zer who was very, very honest with me. And she said, my employer says all the right things. And he thinks I'm a lazy slacker. He has no idea, because we've never built a relationship with me, that I'm caring for my mom with stage 4 cancer. And so what he thinks is I don't care about anything is I am so trying to take care of my mother that I sometimes come to work and I'm exhausted at the beginning of the day. Well, he didn't know that. So I think sometimes, once again, this communication gap that we have could be filled, and maybe there's a greater sense of compassion and empathy. And maybe we don't say they're lazy slackers. We go, I had no idea you were caring for so many things.
Yeah. All right. So now we're back to the acid test that I tell every manager is you need to know something about each person that works for you at a personal level. Not invasively so, but something. Somebody has cancer in their family and they're dealing with, you need to know it. I also think, though, somebody has a side gig that they're running in addition. It's good to know that, because who knows what skills are there that you might want to bring in. I mean, you have no clue what is happening if you don't ask some of these, or a charitable cause that they're deeply involved in, or whatever. Okay, so we're on the notion that we have to drop our preconceived ideas about Gen Z, as we have to drop our preconceived ideas about everybody if we're really going to work with them. We have this notion that the myth that they don't care is not correct. They just care about different things. They care about the marginalized. They care about the entrepreneurial world. They care about having a system that's not antiquated. They care about transparency. They care that you do what you say you're going to do. And they want you to be known for more than just their output.
Yeah. Yeah. They want to have a voice. I want to add, Wanda, to the,
Okay.
They want to have a voice from day one. And there's many managers who go, there is no way I'm going to give you a voice on day one. But the reason they want that is, well, one, they've grown up on a phone where they had a voice. You could weigh in immediately on social media, anything, even if you had no idea what you're talking about. But they've been conditioned that way by the world we raised them in. But let me tell you what we did in our office. We have a lot of Gen Zers. We say everyone has a voice, not everyone has a vote. And what that means is you all get to weigh in, but eventually the leadership team has to run point and, decide the situation that we're going to do. Another phrase we go by, especially with our Gen Zers, is this: everyone is more important than their job. No one is more important than the mission. So they know we care about you beyond 9 to 5. We care about your life, and we do know something about your personal life, and maybe that you're caring for your mother who's got stage 4 cancer. But the mission has to go forward. This is not a fellowship hall where we're just chit-chatting all day over coffee.
Right.
So I think clarifying those things right up front. Some of these kids that take the full-time job, it's the first full-time job they've ever had. So you need to explain, this ain't a classroom, this is a workroom. But in doing so, have some of those statements, perhaps that I just gave, that help them realize, here are the guardrails that I have to go by, and I can actually exist here and flourish. Yeah,
Right.
I'll stop there.
Right. So there's a sense that you do care about me, but I'm not the center of the universe in the
That's
work
right.
world. It's not the only thing that's
Yeah.
happening. And I think I mean, I know we say the opposite, but I've actually, if you demonstrate you do care, I think they're pretty good about getting along with this one. I think there's some interesting tools, and we're going to talk about your tools in just a minute, Tim, but there's some interesting tools of giving people a voice without taking all day long. So, and I'm on this mission of how do we have fewer meetings and more productive input. But if you think about running, here's the thing we're thinking about. What are the ideas? I could run that on Slack. I could run that on a discussion board if anybody knows what that is anymore. I could run it as a poster in the office. I could run it as an email trail if you don't have a better choice. I could run it in, a suggestion box for that matter, a social media campaign, to give people a chance to weigh in, and even just weighing in without bias for age. You might be surprised at what you get out of that you want to pick up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm hearing loads of stories of Gen Zers that work for some even a Fortune 500 company, and they realized that none of their ideas were being taken, which maybe they shouldn't have, but after beating their head against the wall 6, 7, 8 months, they have quit and started their own company. And I'm saying maybe that wasn't necessary, boss or manager. Had you just listened and maybe considered you have vision on the past, because that's where your experience is. They have a little vision on where the culture is going and intuition on where it's going. So I think I need to coach a little bit more than I used to coach and listen a little bit more than I used to listen.
And I would argue, Tim, give people a tiny bit of a time to develop ideas. One of the things that I believe is that the idea, when it first appears, I don't care which generation gives it, it's usually a quarter baked at best. A little bit more time, just a little bit more energy, a little more clarity around that can turn that half baked into something you're quarter baked, and something you're like, oh, wait, maybe we should consider it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about how for a minute, because you have some brilliant suggestions that absolutely anybody can do, but you put these all in 4 pillars. You want to briefly explain the 4 pillars so just we get the framework here?
Yeah. So I talk about leading them well. And so the 4 pillars spell the word well. So you want to welcome them. And I talk about welcoming them in the glasses still half full. And then next, of course, you're going to want to equip them and prepare them to do the job. And again, please remember, these might be young adults, young professionals who all through their life, mom and dad said, keep focusing on academics. Mm-hmm. I was working a job at 12 years old, throwing newspapers on driveways and then working fast food restaurants. So I was a little more ready, not because I'm brilliant, because I was experienced. Today, we need to do a lot of preparation. And I think what I'm tempted to do, Wanda, is gaslight a little bit. I kind of make them feel stupid for not knowing certain things when I need to remember, oh my gosh, of course you don't know. We never explained this. You never experienced it. And so I find myself, just to be compassionate, say, oh, I didn't mention that to you. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what that meant when I was your age either. Let me explain. And that makes them feel a little bit like they can keep their dignity.
Okay.
So that's a huge one as well. So I try to get very, very practical. And by the way, let's make sure we talk about empathizing. I think we want to make sure we cover that as well. And then, of course, we're going to need them, and we're going to need to empower them along the way. So I feel as though if we will lead them well, they will be a generation that will respond well. But it may be different than when we started our careers and we just stuck our nose to the grindstone, just did the work and we didn't have any relationship with the the boss in the ivory tower. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was bide your time and put in your grunt labor hours, and people are less willing to do that. By the way, in a age of automation, I'm not sure they should be willing to put in the grunt hours in the same way. If they can automate it, well, why not? All right, so let's focus on tactics then. I have some that I happen to love, and one of them is this notion of making the first day unforgettable. Explain that. Explain why it matters.
Okay, so Gen Z in our research won't say they want you to make a big deal. But again, I don't know that too many people of any generation go, yeah, I'll make them, it's kind of like that. But when we make their first day unforgettable by perhaps having something waiting for them at their workstation or their desk, maybe it's balloons, maybe it's a coupon for a lunch, or maybe it's someone on their team saying, I'm taking your lunch on day one. Now, some places do that, but oftentimes they're probably scared. I don't know anybody. And here you're setting the table literally for me on day one. So I know places that will station people knowing first day on the job, people are coming in through the door. They put two people out front just to give them a hug and say, we're so glad you're here, Josh or Jessica. Come on in. We're waiting for you in here. And then sometimes there's a circle going, we're glad you're here. All that seems cheesy, perhaps, listeners, but oh my gosh. Suddenly the first impression is, these are my people. I want to stay here. I'm not thinking about checking out after week one. I'm thinking about checking in. So that would be the welcome them well. Just do something extraordinary. Yeah.
I feel part of it. I feel like I belong. I feel like somebody cares. And by the way, the loneliness scores are terrible for this generation.
Yeah.
There is one thing. And how many of us have shown up to work, by the way, on the first day of a new job? Your computer isn't there. Your email isn't working. Maybe whatever phone you had wasn't available yet. And you're sitting there going, what do I do? And there's nobody to come and talk to you. I mean, how horrible of experience. Can't we go the other opposite? I mean, how hard is that to do?
Yeah, very, very hard, especially if you're part of a generation that's been on a screen and haven't developed interpersonal skills to even know how to ask. So again, I'm not excusing, I'm explaining. It makes me way better as a leader to know I probably ought to lean in here, to this young lady who is probably scared to death and can hardly wait till 5 o'clock, on day one.
Right.
So I guess I'm not trying to turn you listeners into therapists, but I am trying to turn you into caring people for these younger generation employees.
Well, and here's the deal. You don't have to do it yourself as the leader of the business unit. You just have to have somebody who's close to them in age who will understand what they're thinking, reach out and make that connection. And I can imagine doing this as the walk-in at the door. I can imagine that there's something at the desk. I can imagine that somebody walks them to the desk. I can imagine that somebody says, hey, I'm coming to pick you up for a coffee. Let's walk down to the coffee room. Somebody says, we're going to lunch. Just those markers in that first day makes day 2 and day 99 a whole lot easier. All right. And we think it's all about the relationships to start on day 1. Okay. Let's move to your second one that I like. You say establish personal connections early. I think they're kind of related, but give me what you're thinking there.
A phrase I like to use, Wanda, is this: we must build bridges of relationship that can bear the weight of honest disclosure. So a lot of times we're, hey, how's your family? Fine, good. And we really don't care. That's not a relationship. That's a cliche. So I am encouraging, like you hinted at earlier, that we know something beyond the job or the task they have. I have tried to get to know every one of our team members, and I've got something to talk about with them that's not just the job they're doing today. In fact, the reason I think that's important is I have found when I lean in to their personal life, they lean in to me as their boss and want to get the job done. It's a reciprocal thing that human beings tend to do, young or old. So we do ourselves a service to get to know them outside the job. In fact, think about the opposite. If I only care about them on the job, they might be thinking, wow, nobody's looking out for me. Nobody's looking out for my best interest, and now they're preoccupied with personal stuff on text messages or social media or whatever, rather than paying attention to the job. It does us good as employers to really pay attention to the personal, so they will pay attention to the work.
Right. All right. And I'll just add to that, Tim, with some respect that some people are a little more reserved in how much they want to reveal about their personal. and some are not reserved at all about how they, but even still, there's something in there to know, something they're passionate about, a hobby, an interest, a family circumstance or situation, a thing they do on the weekend. Just knowing that goes a long way. You have something to talk about. And by the way, that's where trust is really built, is that commonality, not on the credibility and reliability. All right, fair enough. I would also say, yes, me as a manager, but it's also great to get the team building personal connections early on. So it's not just down to me as the manager having to do everything.
Yeah. There's a desperate need for community. As you mentioned, loneliness is skyrocketing on all generations, but mostly Gen Z. Building community on your team, it does a world of good. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. I want to talk about this one. You say, illustrate how you value them. All right. So first off, it boggles me. We all are more motivated by the positive than by the critical. All of us as human beings. Why is it we struggle with this as managers to do that? I'm not asking you to answer it. I don't think you're saying tell them how great they are when they're not, but you're saying value them. What do you mean by illustrate how you value them?
I think they need to know that we're not suspicious that they're not going to make it, but instead just the opposite. It's belief. So Gen Z, like most human beings, do best when their leader shows high expectations and high belief. Those are two different things. So high expectations may feel harsh if there's no belief, like I expect you to do 15 of these today, or whatever. But if you couple that with high belief, like, I really believe, Janet, you can do this. I've watched you. Now that feels like, oh, okay, well then I'm going to rise to, you must know that I can do that. So the phrase that research shows us that young people respond to is this. Let's say we're having a tough conversation about something they didn't rise to the occasion. They made a mistake. This statement is huge. When the boss says, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high expectations of you and I know you can reach them. Do you see how that's expectations and belief? It's personal and this is the job. I'm telling you, they respond because what's most important to a young employee is both status, meaning where do I stand on this organizational chart next to my colleagues here? And if we give them a sense of, oh, I believe in you. From day one, I believe in you. Oh, now they're not going to be fighting for notice or recognition.
Right.
They're going to go, you believe in me. So I just think it's important. High expectation, high belief is important to communicate to them.
Tim, I have never thought about that as many times as I've talked about this and coached on it. High expectation and high belief. And it's true. What I find is when I ask people, I don't care what generation, name a leader that inspired you. The number one answer coming back is they believed I could do more than I thought I could do. That belief is what drives inspiration.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
So saying, I'm giving you feedback because I believe in you and I know you can do better. Wow. Okay. Whole lot easier to take under those circumstances.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Now, I imagine I could say that with a guilt trip. We're not trying to go down the guilt trip path.
Absolutely.
Okay. And this is stuff you say from day one, how you value them from day one, but you can value them for who they are as people. You can value them for their analytical capability. You can value them for their just general ideas. You can value them for their contribution, for their enthusiasm, for their energy. There's a ton of ways in which you can value them. It's just a matter of saying, I believe in you. Okay?
Yeah, no doubt.
All right. Okay, you have an acronym, A-LEG. Tell us about that one.
Well, for years in everyday conversation, we'll go, this is the leg you got to stand on here, meaning this is, you go to the bank on. So when I watch a young team member from Gen Z not come through or maybe make a mistake that seemed like a knucklehead mistake, I'm tempted to just go into them and just correct them. But I believe you need to connect before you correct. So a leg is 4 words that remind me of a sequence of steps I need to take as their leader. The letter A reminds me, ask. I need to ask, not tell them they did something wrong. So when I ask, I'm going, oh, let's say I'm talking to you, Wanda. Wanda, that was an interesting decision you just made. I don't know if I would have made that, but tell me, what was behind that decision? So I'm not going, what were you thinking? I'm not doing that. Instead, I'm truly, genuinely asking them. And when we ask questions in that way, they feel valued. Don't you feel
Yep.
valued when a boss
Yep.
is asking you questions?
Yep.
The letter L is listen. It does little good to ask any questions unless we're willing to listen. When I listen, they feel heard. And by the way, the number one desire of Gen Z is I want to have a voice. I want to be heard. So when I'm truly listening, they feel heard. The letter E is empathize. So I've asked, they feel valued. Listen, they feel heard. When I empathize, they feel understood. So now, Wanda, I'm just going to say, as a male, I had to learn this. Um, I need to learn to say things that are comfortable, but say things like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that happened to you. Or, oh, wow, I bet that made you feel awful. Something like that. Now, don't use my words, use what's comfortable for you. But when I do that to a 22-year-old, they're going, okay, he understands me now. So I ask, listen, and empathize. Now, letter G, I have permission to do what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is guide them. So now I'm able to do the guiding, but now I built this bridge of trust and relationship and honest disclosure. And now I can say, okay, now what we need to do to get this right now is X, Y, Z. So I think you earn it through relationship rather than a badge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's consistent with what we're seeing in a variety of places, that when I have a relationship and I believe you care about me, Tim, I am far more willing to take your critical feedback than if it's the polar opposite. That's Kim Scott's, if you just give me the feedback and we don't have any kind of trusting relationship, then it feels brutal.
Yeah, it's so true.
But otherwise, I can say I might not like it, but I can get it. So the formula, I like it, a leg. I like to stand on respect and dignity. So ask with a genuine sense of curiosity. That is an interesting, it wouldn't have been my choice, but walk me through how you got there. And mean it, not going, how on earth did you get there? And then listen with a bit of curiosity, which is, how did you see this? How were you thinking? How did that go together? All right. And then empathize. Try to find something in it that you can connect with, even if you think you would have made a completely different decision. And then I can give the guidance.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm actually learning this listening thing with my adult children. My daughter Bethany and I, we are both strong-willed. And I just realized she doesn't need another talk from dad. So I called her and I said, could we take every month, could we take an hour together and just talk by phone? And Bethany, I want you to know, my job is just to listen. I became convinced, Wanda, that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, it's indistinguishable. And I think by listening, I am loving her. And not in a weird way, but just loving her by just hearing her out. And I'm telling you, you know what I learned? She's now asking me questions. So it just happens when we lead well and we build relationships well.
Boy, it's hard to do too, though. As a parent or as a seasoned leader or as somebody who's been around the organization for a while, it's like you just think that shortcut is, let me tell you, because that's fast and I'm rushing from this to that to that, but you're going to lose them. And by the way, you're losing everybody else too, just for the record.
Yeah. So true.
People stop thinking. If you do it any differently, they stop thinking. And I have to ask you, is that really what you want your organization to do? Stop thinking. So a leg. All right. Now give feedback. This is what I want to do. Because everybody believes that I talk to that this generation does not want feedback, that they only want the accolades, not the feedback. What's your perspective?
Yeah, in many ways, this is true. I'm sure if we took the 59 million Gen Zers, we would find a large segment that would be a little fragile. And maybe mama made them fragile back in the day.
Or dad, just for the record.
Dad, that's right. Yeah, let's be fair. I really love, once again, this expectation belief thing. I think they're kissing cousins. They need to be together. In fact, let me just reiterate. High expectation without high belief feels harsh. But high belief without high expectation feels hollow. You say, believe in me, but you don't really expect much. I don't think that's like, a parent that goes, you're awesome, but I don't expect my son to come through. So we've got to have both. Now, here's how we need to wade into that feedback. We need to let them know that we really do believe there's a future here. I think the reason I need to start there is they're wondering, am I going to lose my job? I know already I didn't do something well because your face is screaming that to me right now. So I really see a future here, if indeed you do. But then I need to go into that. Let me ask some questions. Like I said, let me listen, let me empathize. But if it's all done in a spirit of a mentor mindset, not a suspicion mindset, like I didn't think you were going to get this right. And sure enough, you proved me right. One of our core values that are on our team, Wanda, is begin with belief. Begin with belief. So on day one, when Cam started for us at 22 years old, right out of the University of Michigan, I made up my mind. I'm going to begin with belief. Instead of saying, you got to earn my respect, son, I said, Cam, I just want you to know, I believe you're going to flourish here. In fact, one day I may be working for you, and he chuckled. But in just that spirit, you know what I got back? Same thing, respect, belief. I want to hear you out. So I'm telling you, this is just good behavioral science, but it happens to be good
Well,
leadership too.
you said it earlier, we are reciprocal human beings. If you give me belief, I'm going to give you back belief. If you give me trust, I'm going to give you back trust. And so rather than waiting to it be earned before you grant it, I think as a leader, your job is to grant a bit
Yes.
to
Yeah,
begin with and
that's
then
right.
take it from there.
You
Okay, I
mind
want
if
to do this
you
last.
mind if I say one quick thing to
Go
add to
for it.
that? I know time is ticking.
It's okay.
The compliment sandwich doesn't work on gens. The data has shown. You all know what I mean by that. Say something nice, then say something you mean, and then say something nice. They can see right through it. They're way too savvy. So I would say go in with an authentic belief. Say what you authentically can say. John Maxwell taught the 101% principle. Find the 1% you can affirm and give it 100% of your attention. So if we do that and don't do this silly compliment sandwich, I think we're going to get somewhere. Okay. Yeah. Well, Gen Z, if they're like their counterparts in their generation, are often going to come in with two noticeable traits: a high sense of agency, and that means they feel very empowered by that smart device they've been holding for years now. They might even feel a little cocky, a little arrogant because they feel like they know so much. They watch 17 YouTube videos or whatever. So expect a high sense of agency. But then it almost seems paradoxical, a high sense of anxiety. So one screams, I don't need your help. The other screams, I desperately need your help. So we need to read him before we lead him. In this moment, we need to say, ooh, hands off. You got this, Josh. Go for it, buddy. Come back with what you found out. But on the other hand, it might be they need an arm around the shoulder saying, hey, why don't you take a quick break and we'll come back and revisit this in 10 minutes. And we need to be caring in that sense. So those two almost always show up, Wanda, from the job interview, from the very beginning. I talked to one employer in LA that said he interviewed a recent graduate. Within 15 minutes of the job interview, she said, I'm going to have your job in 18 months. That's what she said to her hiring manager. Probably not a good thing to say, but she meant to come across confident. In fact, she came across cocky. So anyway, those two are what I often see in the
Yeah.
interview. Yeah.
Yeah. I see that. And by the way, before we discredit, YouTube and the fact that they've only listened to the YouTube, my goodness, you can learn a lot of stuff. One of my friends recently said, I'm convinced I can do minor surgery by just watching YouTube videos. I mean, the number of things we're now doing around the household, for example, by watching a video is amazing. So before we discredit that, we got to give them a little credit for having looked up the YouTube video and tried it. But it's interesting to also recognize this anxiety that is higher than we're used to. And it's not your responsibility, I would say, to fix the anxiety, but a little reassurance, a little belief could go a long ways. Okay. All right. Tim, the book is filled with tons of practical examples, stories of companies, what they've done, how they've done it, how they've put these principles in place. But I also think you've just got a formula here that absolutely any manager anywhere can do. And I love this idea about how you welcome them sets the tone, the getting to know them, the have high expectations and a high belief, and show that value on a regular basis. Give the feedback, but in the context of high belief, and recognize, there's a little anxiety. Okay? It's not a hard formula to do as a manager if you really stop and think about it.
Absolutely. And they need to know we care about their mental health. We're not a therapist, we're an employer, but if they know that, again, they're willing to lean into the job because we've leaned into caring for them as a human being.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me what you said at the start. One of your mottos for your company is everyone is more important than their job, but no one's more important than the mission. Okay? Perfect stance. Tim, the book, by the way, is called The Glass is Still Half Full. I think I got that title correct.
That's right. And it's absolutely free. It's an ebook that you can download, and I'm hoping it's helpful. Yeah.
I think it will absolutely be helpful. And by the way, the precursor of that one, making the different generations on your team a competitive advantage, it's called A New Kind of Diversity, is also a great compendium to go with it. Tim, thanks for joining us today. It's been a fabulous conversation.
It's my pleasure, Wanda. Thanks for hosting me.
Certainly. And join us next week for another chance to get out of your comfort zone.
Thank you for joining us today. Tune in for another edition next week with Dr. Wanda Wallace on the Voice America Business Channel. Reach outside your comfort zone this week.